So the biggest thing to know is vaccines are super sensitive to both temperature and light.
Yeah.
Read the label of anything you're using, of course, but that's kind of the general idea. And so whenever I started to look at this, I looked back at myself both as a producer and a veterinarian. I thought, that's kind of a narrow range. Even going to your veterinarian's office to pick up your vaccines. Well, if I throw them in the seat of the truck and I make a stop by the farm store on the way home, they've probably gotten outside that range. So that's what I am, wanting people to stop and think about is, are these vaccines really staying at temp? Because there are huge implications if they don't.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast Show. I'm Travis Molynix, and today I have Dr. Jessica Newberry. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate that.
No problem. So you're a veterinarian. You also have multiple other degrees. I think an MS in Ag Econ, an MBA. Really have a lot of business experience. I'm assuming.
Yes, sir.
So give the audience kind of, because you got a very broad background. Being a veterinarian, MBA, the master's degree in Ag Econ. Kind of give the audience your background of how you got where you are today.
Yep. So I'm a farm girl. I grew up on a dairy in Missouri, and about the early 90s, we got out of the dairy and switched over to beef cattle. So grew up showing Angus rodeoing. So farming's just really in my blood. And went to Mizzou, did my undergrad in vet school, practiced for a few years, and I figured out that I like the numbers and the high and the hows and the whys in
Mm,
addition to
yeah,
just being around cattle. So that kind of led me to dig into the business aspect a little bit. And so over the course of my career, I've held various positions, marketing, research, technical services veterinarian. And today I still have a few stockers, and now we're doing some heifer development. Looking forward to the build back of our U.S. cattle herd.
that's great. Great. So what do you do now with Virbac?
hmm So, I am the Associate Director of Marketing and Technical Services for the Livestock Health Division. This means I act as tech service veterinarian, supporting our salespeople, our vets, and our producers out in the field if they have questions or want to learn about our products. Then I'm also responsible for making the ads and getting placements, that kind of thing.
That's a massive list of responsibilities.
It is. We're a small team, so we've been in the U.S. market for about 3 years,
Yeah.
even though we're number five globally in ruminants and started over 50 years ago by a vet, focusing on large animal products. So as we grow this team, we wear lots of hats and then
Yeah.
really embrace the entrepreneurial spirit, just like all of our producers. So we just do what needs to be done.
Virbac, committed to growth. As fellow cattle professionals and veterinarians working with herds around the world for over 50 years, we know the challenges you face in the unpredictable world of caring for cattle. That's the Virbac difference. Whatever your herd size may be, we offer a new approach to cattle health, one driven by passion, knowledge, and genuine understanding of your needs. Our products are backed by on-farm research to ensure they help you thrive in the real world. In everything we do, we are dedicated to supporting you and the well-being of your cattle for generations to come. For more information, visit vet-us.virbac.com/cattle or see your Virbac representative.
And so, what are you guys focusing on? I know you do, companion animals and beef and dairy cows, or swine as well. Is there?
So we have swine as well. So a couple of our injectable antibiotics are labeled for swine. So
Okay.
that's available for use. And we started off with two antibiotics. And this year we're launching vaccines. And so that's why, I want to talk to people and kind of go back to the basics
Yeah.
about vaccines and vaccine handling, because if you do the little things right, it allows everything else to really have a greater benefit.
Yeah. So that's kind of a hot topic, or at least it has been in the last several years of we have not handled vaccine properly, right? So we've been very ignorant about how we've handled it and we might as well have just, shot the vaccine in the ground.
Absolutely.
So What is proper vaccine handling?
So the biggest thing to know is vaccines are super sensitive to both temperature and light.
Yeah.
Read the label of anything you're using, of course, but that's kind of the general idea. And so whenever I started to look at this, I looked back at myself both as a producer and a veterinarian. I thought, that's kind of a narrow range. Even going to your veterinarian's office to pick up your vaccines. Well, if I throw them in the seat of the truck and I make a stop by the farm store on the way home, they've probably gotten outside that range. So that's what I am, wanting people to stop and think about is, are these vaccines really staying at temp? Because there are huge implications if they don't. For example, a lot of us use modified live vaccines.
Hmm.
Well, if they get above 75 degrees, that really impacts their efficacy. So they're not going to work even if you put them in the cow. And then for killed vaccines, also known as inactivated vaccines, if they freeze in your refrigerator, that can, release a lot of LPS and cause problems in the cow. So it's not even the vaccine's not going to work, but can also cause some problems with shock and that kind of thing. So super important.
So does the bottom end of that, especially on modified lives, do we have a concern getting too cold
Mhm.
of how that affects the efficacy of the vaccine versus getting too hot?
For the modified life portion, so the freeze-dried cake itself, it's not as big a concern. The concern with modified live comes from the diluent. So
Hmm.
if you're using a five-way lepto, that lepto is your diluent. And if that lepto diluent freezes, you still have that issue. So yes, it's important for both. And actually, it's really easy to monitor. So one of the things that I've been doing is I did a little reading where there's a study out of University of Arkansas in 2009 that went around and looked at 191 refrigerators. 75% of those were producers, about 20% retail stores, and the rest vets. And out of this, they found that 76% of refrigerators didn't stay within the safe zone of 35 to 46 degrees over a period of 48 hours. And I was like, you're kidding me. Like, that is crazy because we all think, hey, it's in the refrigerator, it's good. And that's not even talking about placement in the refrigerator. That's just, does your refrigerator work?
Yeah.
So, doing something like, getting online, buying a high low temp thermometer that has one of those little vials of fluid you stick in there with it
Mhm.
really is eye opening and tells you what's the range of your refrigerator. Did it get too hot? Did it get too cold? And I think could save a lot of vaccines with just a little bit of effort.
I'm assuming this is not a opening and closing aspect of, you know, people opening and closing the refrigerator too often. It was just a refrigerator running
Yes.
and having those highs and lows issues.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that was the biggest point is where's your refrigerator located? Because for a lot of us, it's out in the barn and it's not in a temperature controlled environment. And in that, studies have shown that the colder the environment, or excuse me, the hotter the environment, the more the refrigerator has to work. And then it's actually at a greater risk of freezing. So, where you have that refrigerator placed is actually more important than how old the refrigerator is. Because let's face it, we all take our old refrigerator out of the house, we put it in the barn. That's where we store all of our animal health products. And so, it's not as much the age, it's more about location.
Right.
And then it does matter where the vaccines are in the refrigerator itself. So, the door is a really bad location to store vaccines because it has the highest temperature fluctuation. Like you said, we're always opening and closing the door, but it's also the furthest away from that condenser. And so putting your vaccines bottom shelf towards the back is the best place to store them.
And I'm assuming, I think they make refrigerators that handle the extreme temperatures. And so for a producer, if you think about, you know, the cost of vaccines, you know, you're spending more on vaccines than you are buying a brand new refrigerator.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it's probably worth the money of actually buying a refrigerator that can handle the ups and downs of our temperature changes, but being in a barn, et cetera, that's not a temperature controlled room.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the other thing we think about too is so if we've taken good care of our vaccines, and that means transporting them at the right temperatures as well. So whenever you're picking up your vaccines or you're taking them from the barn out to the shoot area, they need to stay within that 35 to 45 degree range. And it's super easy to do this by using coolers. So, um, even a soft sided cooler is great. Throw some ice packs in there before, because years ago, I always threw ice packs in the cooler, and off down the road I went to go vaccinate cattle. And
Mhm.
in taking a little time to put a small thermometer in there, and they're only like $5. You can get them online. It's really eye-opening how long it takes that soft-sided cooler with the ice packs to get down to temp. So throw your ice packs in, make sure your soft-sided cooler is at the right temperature before you even put your vaccines in. And then don't forget to put some packing around it so that those vaccines aren't touching the ice packs, because if they're touching them, they can freeze just being in your cooler. So um, that's another little thing just to keep in the back of your mind.
No, that's a very good point. What about the time frame of how long does it have to be at that higher temp?
So not very long,
Okay,
because if you think it's not going to jump to that temp, it's going to come up
gradually.
um, very shortly. So if it reaches that higher temp, you should discard the vaccines. If you ever get vaccines shipped to you and you open that box, your ice packs are melted, they're warm, that's when you should discard the vaccine and reject the shipment, because there's no use putting vaccine in your cattle when you're going to expect a good response, and your cows are going to be protected whenever you put something in them that's never going to work in the first place.
Good to know. So, what is your recommendation about handling that vaccine at the chute then? There's a lot of concerns even at the refrigerator. What about at the chute that we're in a less controlled environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guilty of it too. But the biggest thing is take a cooler with you. So if it's a really hot day and you have a lot of cattle to work through the chute, take two. Have one that's sitting in the shade, not on the back of your truck, that where you store your vaccines you're going to use, and then another cooler right close to the chute where you can keep your vaccines. Only mix up enough vaccine that you're going to use in the next hour. Because let's face it, cattle get out, equipment breaks, and if your vaccines are left, especially a modified live mixed for over an hour, it starts to lose its efficacy. So you need to throw that away. So mix up just enough for an hour. And then because vaccines are temperature and light sensitive, if you lay those down to go do something else, cover them with a towel, and or depending if it's going to be more than about a minute or two, put them back in the cooler.
Hmm,
They make some really nice vaccine coolers that you can just stick your syringe down in there. It's protected from light, it stays cool. But make sure you've got that thermometer in there, because doing just a few little tests here at my house, just sticking ice packs in and looking at thermometer every 10 minutes, it takes it a while to get down to temp. So, you're preparing the night before anyway. Prepare your cooler, take it with you to the chute, and then mix up what you need and keep it covered and cool while you're there.
And that's a big challenge sometimes if you get caught up in wanting to get stuff done, you get caught up in the day and so it's easy sometimes to think I want to mix up for this, a larger group and that this is not just vaccine issues that people tend to buy too big of a bottle,
Yes.
right? So do you want to touch on that aspect because that can be a massive issue as well as that you overbuy and now you've got some issues down the road because you have this massive bottle that you have to re-entry, et cetera, so many times.
The biggest thing is like you said, buy what you need. You're saving money in the long run if you don't have to throw vaccines away. And then make sure, you know, if you can't fill your syringe with all the contents of the bottle, every time you go in and out of that vaccine bottle to refill your syringe, you have to use a new needle. Because if you think about it, if you're using a needle that's already gone through the skin of a calf, there's bacteria on the skin, there's bacteria in our skin,
All right.
and then you're putting that in the vaccine. So there's risk of contamination. For modified live, you can't use them the next day. So if you buy, you know, you've got 30 cows to vaccinate and you buy a 50 dose, you have to throw those other 20 doses away. So you're probably better off to buy three 10-dose vials.
Correct.
For our inactivated vaccines, for our killed vaccines, you can use them after you first open the bottle for a specific amount of time. This varies by vaccine. So just read the vaccine label. Can I keep this until I work cows again in 2 days' time? Maybe, maybe not. Just depends on the vaccine you're using.
Yeah, I always recommend is you buy the smallest dose that you think you're going to use for the that given circumstance,
Hmm.
right? Not for the herd number, but for the that time of working.
Yes.
And so that allows for a lot of flexibility in that you don't run into these issues of now I've got to throw away 20 doses, 30 doses, etc., because we didn't get to these groups.
Hmm. And one thing you can do is buy multiple packs of those smaller doses, store them in your refrigerator. When you put vaccines in a refrigerator, you need to do a couple things. One, put the newest dated vaccine or the longest dated vaccines in the back, so the shortest dated are in the front. Then every time you get any animal health product out to give to your cattle, make sure you're looking at the expiration date. So many times, you like you said, you overbought last fall, you go to use it in the spring and oh no, it's expired. You really need to discard that. And that's true whether it's a vaccine, an antibiotic.
So this is one question we always had is so expiration date is tomorrow. Can I use it today?
Yes, you can use it today. Technically, you can use it tomorrow, but the day after, you should not.
Okay.
And that comes back to support from the company and their confidence. To establish an expiration date, the companies have to do a lot of testing to make sure that it's still sterile, it's still effective. And so there's a reason those dates are on there.
Yeah. So what is your recommendation about storing vaccines?
Hmm. Pick a refrigerator that's ideally inside or that's made to be in tough temperatures. Store them at the back on the bottom, and really, line them up by vaccine type. And like I said, longest dating in the back so that you can, when you go to vaccinate, you just pull from the front, check the expiration date, and you're on your way.
Those are some really easy steps if you think about it is,
Hmm.
it's just general handling of and keeping an orderliness of, your refrigerator or your vaccines or and how you want to handle those.
One thing I always like to recommend to producers too is we're often giving more than one vaccine at a time, right?
Hmm.
Or other products. Maybe
Right.
we're doing a pour on or an oral drench. And so if you will get in the habit of writing down the product, where it's given, and the serial number every time,
Yeah.
that's a huge help. And I take this a step further by color coding, my syringes, because if I have someone else filling syringes and I'm given the vaccine, it's really easy for us to communicate, hey, this is, the blue one goes on the right, the yellow on the left, right? Right. And
Right.
then they draw up the right vaccine. They can check and make sure we're giving the right dose because so many vaccines have different dose sizes. So you got to watch that as well. So if you can get into a little bit of a habit, keep everything in a kit, maybe some colored duct tape, pen and paper where you write down all of what you're giving and where, that's super
Hmm.
easy. Then also by dating that and having it at the top, how many times have people said, well, I'm not sure if they are past the withdrawal time or not.
Right.
By having it all written down, you can easily calculate the withdrawal time. And I always encourage my producers take 2 more seconds and calculate that withdrawal time.
Hmm.
So I use a little app on my phone where I put in 21 days from today is what date. And then I write it on that piece of paper. Or, if you're using electronic records, it's super easy. And then all right, this, animal needs to go to sale. Is it eligible or not?
Yeah. And that happens a lot with call cows is that at the time when preg checking you didn't know and you poured on or did something and then you
Mm-hmm.
have this withdrawal period. And so that kind of changes those management of I've got to hold on to them for a couple more weeks before I can let them go.
Correct.
Back to taking records, I think it's really important to write down that lot number or making sure just in case something happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is, so if you gave this vaccine and you had an outbreak of whatever, you need those records,
Yes.
right? And to go back to other companies, say, hey, we gave your product, we still had an outbreak. And so, and there could have been something wrong with the lot, could have been something wrong, etc. Right? Without knowing that, you can't go back to you and say, we gave this, but you have no clue what you gave.
It's so important because the first thing, if anyone ever has a problem with animal health product, that company is going to ask is, what did you give? What's the lot number? Where did you give it? And to what animals? So it becomes important if you say, "Oh, I have one of 100 that, are become sick afterwards." That's different than,
Yeah.
one of 10, right? So those records are super easy to keep and will be beneficial to you, beneficial to any animal health company that you're trying to get assistance from if needed.
So important just to keep just general everyday records of, when you processed, what you gave, where you gave it, et cetera, and keep those records long term.
One of the things that I use occasionally on my own farm is I just use the notes in my phone. There's a little notes section. I
Hmm.
keep animal health notes. It uploads to my email. And so, very, very easy if someone says, "Hey, I'm not big enough to have a record keeping system,"
Right.
you can still do it super easy. You can take a picture of the products that you used that day. So, just think outside the box a little bit. It's easier than it sounds.
It is, and it could save you a lot down the road, and help with some decision makings too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially as what did I give last year, and right, and this gets into something like fly control, et cetera. But
Mhm.
we don't want to duplicate what we gave last year with fly control.
For me too, thinking about coming in and maybe I want to change up my preconditioning program on the calves. So now I want to give the calves a modified live. Yeah, the producer has to stop and think, well, were these cows ever given a modified live so it's safe to vaccinate either them or their calves that are still nursing? So having those records, you don't have to go back and think, I think I gave them that. It allows you to be more precise and know what's safe to give your animal.
So, Dr. Newberry, have we covered everything? Is there anything you want to touch on as we wrap up?
I think we've covered it. Just pay attention, buy some thermometers because the biggest thing is you want to give a vaccine the best chance of protecting your animal. And if it's handled poorly and isn't in good condition when it goes in, chances of it working are not as great. So the devil's in the details.
It is. So I think one of the big takeaways for me is check your refrigerator. Before you buy a big dose of vaccines, before what branding or weaning or whatever of calving is, make sure your refrigerator is up to par.
Absolutely.
And so that may be a big change you need to make in your operation is just get a new refrigerator or change the location.
Hmm.
It's time for our famous three.
So to wrap us up, I've got three optional questions.
Okay.
And so the first one is, what is your go-to beef resource book website that you highly recommend people going to?
Well, being a veterinarian, I really love the Smith Large Animal Internal Medicine book. That for me goes back to some basics and helps me, think outside the box. As a producer myself, I love to listen to the Doc Talk podcast. There's lots of different topics brought forward there. I think there's some good information. So that's one I listen to with my producer hat on.
All right. So what is a non-ag, non-beef book resource that you highly recommend people reading, using, listening to?
I love leadership because I think it's important whether it's at work, whether it's with a ball team that you may be associated with your kids, or just within the team that's working cattle with you that day. So, one book I've been reading recently is called "The Wisdom of the Bullfrog." So it's by Admiral William H. McGraven, and I love that he breaks it up into little chapters. You can listen to it as an audiobook, and I just do one chapter at a time, have some reflection. And one of the things in there that really hit home for me is doing the things that you think are beneath you and doing them well. Um,
Right.
for me, that's super important. One podcast that I kind of like, and it has a little bit of an ag slant, is the Vance Crow podcast. Lots of different topics, but very in favor of ag. So there's some ag people on there, but some other things that push you outside your comfort zone. So that's a nice one to challenge yourself with.
Definitely worth looking into both of those. All right. So the last question is, what sets apart a successful beef professional from someone that isn't?
I think what sets apart someone who's a successful beef professional is looking at the details and doing it right. and also continuing to learn. So just because my dad or grandfather did something that way doesn't mean that it's right for my operation today. So I need to put myself out there to look for some resources. Hey, what are other people are doing? Why? And would this work for me? Then not being afraid to, safely try that out on my operation.
Yeah, so that comes up a lot is, you think about we've always done it this way mentality and be willing to step out and adapt because times change.
They do.
Production has changed, our demands, the costs, etc., have changed. And doing it the same way we've always done it doesn't always work. So, nope, that's great. Well, thank you for jumping on the podcast. Really appreciate your time and I learned a lot about vaccine handling. I mean, the refrigerator just never thought about it. You just think refrigerator is going to work. It keeps things cold, but that could be your source of some of your health issues that your herd may be facing is you just don't have a good refrigerator keeping it cold.
Absolutely. And those high-low thermometers that keep track so you can see, hey, what was the highest temp of my refrigerator the last 24 hours? What was the lowest temp? They're super cheap, and I think one of the best investments we can make as producers.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.